If you didn't know, you're going to know soon that Canada is under siege. That's the name of the book. And it's not under siege by the United States or Trump, but by China. Garry Clement is going to join me in a minute. But first, please subscribe and become a member, because we need a channel in this country that does not promote the status quo paid for by the PMO. So, Garry, thank you for coming in, and thank you for writing this book with these other gentlemen. You can write the book yourself. But tell me, Canada under siege, isn't that a little bit of an overstatement?
No, I think if anything, it might be an understatement. If you go back, and I'm going to take it a little back in history. I started in Hong Kong in 1991, and I started drafting all kinds of intelligence reports of triads moving into this country. In 94, I left, and Brian McAdam and I put a report together showing that Canada, if we kept it up, was going to pay a terrible price. In fact, I wrote that Vancouver, or the province of British Columbia, will displace Hong Kong as a transshipment point for narcotics.
Okay, so there's drugs, but what's the terrible price? That's a terrible price alone, but what terrible price is Canada paying now, 30 years later after you wrote that?
Because what happened back then is we started to see politicians with blinders on, embedding themselves with the Chinese, because what has to be understood is when I was in China and I dealt with this multi-billionaire gentleman,
right,
and he said to me, Garry, remember one thing about the Chinese culture. Nobody gives anything for nothing. It's guangxi. If somebody gives you something, they're expecting you to pay back. And our politicians have never learned that.
But our politicians say when there's a criticism of a Chinese financial person or something like that, oh, you're racist.
Yes, I hear that all the time. It's not what we got to look at, though, is what is the impact of our society? What is the impact of our country? What is the impact? And I think what you got to look at is, I consider province of British Columbia ground zero and the province of Ontario ground zero. And
so wait a second, though. So, I mean, there are honest Chinese business people.
Absolutely.
And why can't we separate the honest from the hoods?
Because the diaspora communities are under the thumb of a lot of the Chinese. The United Front that is in each one of these communities are definitely holding down most of the Chinese in these communities. They operate with direct ties into Xi Jinping, and they are aligned with the Chinese Communist Party.
And so, well, what's the matter with that? I mean, they're buying a few businesses.
They're buying businesses, but at what cost? And that's where I'm coming from. What we're seeing, I think, is if you go back, and we go right back to Pierre Elliott Trudeau and his vision of being in bed with the Chinese, thought it was great. He loved their culture. He loved the way they were able to do things. And that has followed through. And as we state in the book, and I've seen it over and over again, just about every one of our former prime ministers end up going to work for the Canadian Chinese Business Corporation. And that comes at a cost, because they're not being objective in what's going to happen to this country. And that's what we're seeing over and over again in this country. And if we go back to Canada, see, we use Prince Edward Island. The reason we use Prince Edward Island, it's a small island. But boy,
small island, and I'm out of time, but there's your book, Canada Under Siege. Garry, thank you very much. 3 minutes. To those of you who have subscribed and donated, a heartfelt thank you. You're keeping us on the air. If you're watching and you haven't, please try to do so, because 4 years ago we started this show because there needed to be independent analysis. Now more than ever, with the Online Harms Act, once that gets into law, it's been passed once by the House, there are going to be hundreds of bureaucrats censoring the news in Canada, censoring this show. We need to keep it on the air. Thanks for your support.